Chapter 71 Joint Array Arrangement. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 71 Joint Array Arrangement. Mu Chen also looked in front of him and could see 5 deep yellow pillars erected on the vast square. The stone pillars were filled with mysterious engravings. Around the stone pillars, there were traces of spiritual aura within the world fluctuating. This is a spirit convergence pillar crafted by spirit convergence rocks, right? Mu Chen walked forward and looked at the 5 spirit convergence pillars. The rank 3 spirit convergence array within the Northern Spiritual Academy also had these things. However, the spirit convergence pillars at that place were shining gold. Its purity was also much higher than the 5 pillars in front of him. These 5 spirit convergence pillars are the central cores of the spirit convergence array. Every single one of them costs millions of spirit coins. Mu Feng said with a faint laugh. Mu Chen nodded. A spirit convergence array was different than ordinary spiritual arrays. Although it does not possess any offensive abilities, it is an essential item for many forces. Moreover, it is a symbol of strength for these forces. The reason why the Lu territory was able to become the strongest force within the Northern Spiritual Realm was because they possess a rank 2 spirit convergence array, aside from the fact that they were truly stronger than the others. In order to cultivate within a rank 2 spirit convergence array, many powerhouses would defect to the Lu territory in order to obtain better cultivation conditions, allowing themselves to go further on the path of cultivation. And generally speaking, a spirit convergence array could be considered a rather well-known spiritual array to people. Many spiritual array masters are aware of its diagram array. However, they are only aware of it. It was still extremely difficult if they want to construct it. Not to mention about the various rare materials that a spirit convergence array requires, the required number of spiritual seals in order to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array was a total of 50. Even rank 2 spiritual array masters, who were less skilled, may not create it alone. Moreover, they were extremely rare existences within the Northern Spiritual Realm. It was impossible for the Mu territory to invite them over. Thus, they could only use numbers and see if it could be completed by a joint force of 4 rank 1 spiritual array masters. Fortunately, Wen Ling had already been long regarded as a top existence among the rank 1 spiritual array masters and was highly likely to ascend to a rank 2 spiritual array master. With him leading, it would increase the chances significantly. To construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array this time, the 5 of us will each be responsible for 1 spirit convergence marble. We will base it on the diagram array and each of us will be responsible for a portion of it. Then, we will connect it together and cause the array to activate. Wen Ling looked at Mu Chen and said. Although this method of being responsible for a portion of the diagram array is a way, it seems that it requires a high compatibility rate, right? If even the slightest mistake occurred during the connection process, it will probably. Mu Chen hesitated for a moment. He was not a rookie in spiritual arrays now and could naturally discover the flaw in this approach. Wen Ling nodded and sighed. It can't be helped. I think that it's impossible to find such an amazing rank 2 spiritual array master within the entire Northern Spiritual Realm, who could construct a rank 2 spirit convergence array by himself. When the Lu territory constructed their rank 2 spirit convergence array, they also used this approach. And based on my knowledge, they secretly failed many times and suffered a huge loss. However, normal individuals did not know this. Mu Feng smiled and said. The materials that we gathered could only support 1 more failure. Otherwise, we will have to spend some time to prepare it again. If we were to fail to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array, the Lu territory will probably not give up on this chance of attacking us. They will spread it out loudly and that will be detrimental to us. Zhou Yi said helplessly. Mu Feng waved his hand and smiled as if he did not care. It's fine if you do your best. Zhou Yi let out a bitter laugh. He knew that Mu Feng did not want to give too much pressure and responsibility to Mu Chen since Mu Chen had gotten involved with it. This is why he acted so carefree. But in fact, Mu Feng really hoped to construct the rank 2 spirit convergence array. This way, it would reap great benefits to the Mu territory's fame. Mu Chen glanced at Mu Feng and did not say anything. After all, they were father and son. Although Mu Feng might be saying this, he could tell how important this matter was to him. To arrange the array this time, I will be responsible for 20 spiritual seals. As for the remaining 30, Chen Ling and the others will each be responsible for 8. As for Mu Chen, he will be responsible for 6 spiritual seals. Wen Ling looked at Mu Chen and said, "Do not underestimate these 6 spiritual seals. If you want to complete this portion of the diagram array, it will probably be even harder than the spiritual flame array." Mu Chen nodded. Naturally, he understood this truth. Furthermore, he did not have much experience, so Wen Ling had already thought highly of him when he allowed him to be responsible for 6 spiritual seals. Next up, I will explain the key parts of the spirit convergence array. You must carefully remember it, so that you will not make a mistake and ruin everything. Wen Ling said strictly. Yes. Mu Chen gave a slight smile and said. Although the boy's handsome face was quite young, he was still humble and polite. This made the other 3 rank 1 spiritual array masters watching by the side nod their heads. It was rare for this Mu territory's little lord to act so harmonious even with his status and talent. If it was another youth, they would have acted arrogant and butted in already. Mu Feng watched and seriously listened as Wen Ling explained the key points about the spirit convergence array to Mu Chen. He also smiled pleasantly and waved his hand before heading away with Zhou Yi. It was a headache to listen about this and that about spiritual arrays. It was still best to leave that boy to deal with it by himself. In the next few days, Mu Chen would head to this square and study with Wen Ling regarding this rank 2 spirit convergence array. Moreover, with his gentleness and studious attitude, the other 3 rank 1 spiritual array masters were quite satisfied with it. They would also talk about their experiences in arranging spiritual arrays and Mu Chen would humbly learn from it. By working hard, Mu Chen had basically understood the rank 2 spirit convergence array after a few days. At the same time, he was surprised about how complex the spirit convergence array was. Compared to it, the spiritual flame array that he had learned earlier was nothing much. Moreover, Wen Ling and the others were quite satisfied after seeing Mu Chen beginning to understand about this rank 2 spirit convergence array. They discussed it for a while and finally decided to take action tomorrow. Mu Chen stood in the square. He stared at the 5 spirit convergence pillars standing upright and took a deep breath. He gradually allowed himself to calm down. Beside him, Mu Feng patted his shoulders and said with a comforting smile. Just do your best, it doesn't matter if it fails. After all, it will only just be delayed for a while. Mu Chen smiled, but he did not reply. He looked at Wen Ling and saw the latter's face becoming extremely serious. Then, he immediately waved and moved on top of a spirit convergence pillar. Seeing this, Mu Chen and the others also moved and each of them landed on top of a spirit convergence pillar. Prepare yourself. Wen Ling shouted and shook his hands. Then, a clump of light floated out from his hand and a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation emitted out wave after wave. Mu Chen and the others also followed. 4 clumps of light rose to the sky. These were all high-rank spiritual beasts' soul essence. In order to construct this sort of array, spiritual beast's soul essence is an indispensable item. This is because the array requires the massive energy that is accumulated within the soul essence as a guide. Let's begin. Wen Ling stared at the clumps of light overhead and let out a shout. He waved his sleeves and 20 spiritual seals surged out from his sleeves in an instant. This speed of condensing spiritual seals had, indeed, surpassed ordinary rank 1 spiritual array masters. Chen Ling and the other 2 rank 1 spiritual array masters all stared enviously at this. Although they were considered rank 1 spiritual array masters, they were far worse than Wen Ling. The latter could highly likely become a rank 2 spiritual array master. They were jealous for a moment. Then, they collected their thoughts and each of them condensed 8 spiritual seals. They carefully controlled it and allowed them to enter the air surrounding the spiritual beast's soul essence above them. Buzz. Mu Chen also took action now and 6 spiritual seals condensed on his fingertips. With his ability right now, he would be able to manipulate it sophisticatedly if he was only manipulating 6 spiritual seals. The 6 spiritual seals vanished within the surroundings of the spiritual beast's soul essence. Then, the air trembled. Mu Chen closed his eyes slightly and moved his long fingers. As his fingertips trembled, a light emerged within the surrounding air of the spiritual beast's soul essence. Light beams carefully extended out and intertwined with each other. The square was completely silent. The 5 of them were gathering all their thoughts and carefully arranged the portion of the diagram array they were responsible for. Mu Feng and the others stood nearby and had a serious expression as they stared at the fluctuations caused by the spiritual energy. A hint of nervousness flashed through their eyes. If they were to fail this time, this plan of theirs would be delayed for at least 6 months. Moreover, they would definitely be ridiculed by the Lu territory. Pass down an order, do not let anyone approach this location. Mu Feng waved his hand and gently spoke. Yes. A guard hurriedly responded and spread out with a large amount of men. The time quickly passed while Mu Feng and the others were waiting restlessly. In a blink of an eye, an hour passed. The spiritual energy fluctuations at the scene were becoming increasingly violent. Above the 5 individuals and the spirit convergence pillars, a complex spiritual energy diagram array was flashing dazzlingly. Another half an hour quickly passed, when Ling was the first to open his eyes. His eyes were filled with nervousness and seriousness. This time, he assumed half the responsibility of arranging the spiritual array. If others were to make a mistake, they might be able to save it. However, if he were to cause it, it would basically mean that the arrangement of the array would end up in complete failure. Following after Wen Ling, Chen Ling and the others also opened their eyes one after another. It was evident that they had completely the portion of the diagram array they were responsible for. Connect the array. Seeing this, Wen Ling's face became increasingly serious. Next up, it was the most difficult step. If any mistakes were to occur during the connection process, it was likely to affect the situation as a whole and force the entire group to collapse. The 4 of them heard this and tensed up their bodies. They gathered all their focus and moved their thoughts. Then, light beams shot out from the complex light array above them and began to intertwine with each other. At the outside, Mu Feng and the others' hearts pounced when they witnessed this scene. They knew that whether or not it would succeed would all depend on this step. Chapter 72 Heart Array State. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72, Heart Array State. Buzz. A violent and dense spiritual energy trembled within the air like a wave. Everybody outside was staring nervously at the sky. At that location, 5 parts of the complex spiritual energy light array were beginning to gather slowly above Wen Ling and the others' heads. Swoosh! At this moment, the 5 complex light arrays were rapidly trembling. Then, a spiritual energy light beam exploded out and suddenly made contact with each other in the center point of the array. The light beams intertwined with each other complicatedly and bursts of fluctuations emitted out. Wen Ling and the others' faces were extremely serious. They did not dare to be distracted. At this moment, if even a single mistake were to occur when the light beams intertwined with each other, it would lead to serious consequences. Chi. The light beams quietly connected with each other. Then, Mu Feng and the others were able to see that the 5 separated spiritual energy light array were showing faint signs of merging together. However, they still didn't dare to breathe out. This is because they knew that it was not completely successful yet. The time passed by slowly and the trajectories of the connected light beams also became more complicated. This requires a rather precise control. When two spiritual energy light beams made contact with each other, they must control the power of the spiritual energy to the same level. Otherwise, it is highly possible that one side's light beam would be shattered by the other and, thus, the connection would fail. It truly requires sophisticated and subtle control ability. As the connection became increasingly complex, Wen Ling and the other's eyes became more serious. Even cold sweat emerged on their forehead. This sort of control had a considerable consumption on their mind. Mu Chen focused his mind. His eyes suddenly closed, yet Wen Ling and the others did not notice it. Although the sight in front of him was complete darkness, it was strange that his mind seemed to have flowed through the spiritual energy light beams that he controlled and wandered within the spirit convergence array like a flood. Not only was it the part he was responsible for, even Wen Ling and the others' parts were reflected within his heart. At this moment, the other world seemed to have been separated by him. No movement could disturb him. There were only sketched out complex and obscure diagram array trails within his heart. Under this somewhat strange state, the nervousness that Mu Chen had originally felt faded away. His long fingers trembled slightly and the spiritual energy light beam moved precisely based on his thoughts. At this moment, he felt increasingly that he had an innate sense of proficiency over this spiritual array. In mid-air, the 5 diagram arrays were getting closer. The spiritual energy light beams converged together and gradual signs of it completely merging had appeared. When Mu Feng and the others witnessed this scene, they could not hold back the delight surging out from their faces. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Wen Ling did not relax. He understood that it was not considered successful as long as the final step of the connection process was not complete. That is because this tiny step could cause the entire array to collapse. There's only the final bit left. Wen Ling gritted his teeth and attempted to calm himself down. He continued to manipulate the spiritual energy light beam stably and allowed it to connect with the other 4 portions of the diagram array. And when he completed this final step, he could not help but let out a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, he felt a strange fluctuation coming out from the spiritual array. This fluctuation was not strong, yet it instantly changed the color of Wen Ling's face. He hurriedly lifted his head and noticed that traces of disorder had actually appeared in the spiritual array in front of Chen Ling. **T. Wen Ling's heart jumped and his face became pale. It turned out that when Chen Ling was connecting the spiritual array with the spiritual array master to the left of him, the latter's spiritual energy light beam was slightly stronger. It actually caused his spiritual energy light beam to shatter. Upon seeing this, Chen Ling's face changed. He quickly attempted to save it and hastily converged light beams to reconnect them. However, he made a mistake while he was in a rush and, instead, caused the originally stabilized spiritual array to tremble. Gotcha! A sudden sound of breaking emerged from a part of the spiritual array formed by Chen Ling. Then, he stared with a pale face as the spiritual energy light beams were disappearing bit by bit. Finally, it affected the spiritual seals and caused 3 of the spiritual seals to completely shatter. This sudden turn of events made the other 2 spiritual array masters' face change. Especially the one whose spiritual energy was too strong and caused Chen Ling's spiritual energy light beam to fade away. His face was exceptionally ugly. Once a spiritual seal was destroyed, it basically meant that half the spiritual array was destroyed. Moreover, it was impossible to complete the spirit convergence array without Chen Ling's disappeared portion of the spiritual array. This accident was immediately perceived by Mu Feng and Zhou Yi. Their hands gripped together on the spot as they stared at the disorderly spiritual array in front of Chen Ling. They glanced over and noticed a hint of bitterness from the other person's eyes. Indeed, a problem had appeared. Chen Ling, stabilize your mind, do not get confused. Wen Ling shouted out lugly. Chen Ling gritted his teeth and took a couple of deep breaths. He quickly used all his power to stabilize the spiritual array. However, after the 3 spiritual seals shattered, his spiritual array could be considered as incomplete. Brother Wen, I'm afraid that I cannot maintain it for long. Sorry, I've dragged you down this time. Chen Ling said with a bitter smile. You only have 3 spiritual seals that were shattered, so the spiritual array is only slightly incomplete. Can you form more spiritual seals to save it now? Wen Ling gritted his teeth and asked. Chen Ling's face reddened up and he said ashamedly. I probably cannot stabilize this incomplete spiritual array as I continue to form spiritual seals. Wen Ling sighed. Then, he turned to look at the other 2 spiritual array masters. They, too, shook their heads embarrassedly. If they were to distract themselves to help save Chen Ling's portion, problems would probably appear on their side. Seeing this, Wen Ling let out a bitter expression. He had already took the responsibility of completing the most complex portion during this joint array arrangement. Right now, manipulating 20 spiritual seals was already hit limit. It was impossible for him to create any more. He sighed and shook his head helplessly at Mu Feng. It seems that they failed this time as well. Mu Feng let out a bitter laugh and nodded his head. But just when he was about to wave his hand to allow them to stop. However, when he intended to end this time's array arrangement, Zhou Yi suddenly said aloud. Little Mu, he. Mu Feng hurriedly lifted his head when he heard this. He noticed that Mu Chen had his eyes closed tightly and did not seem to have noticed the situation occurring right now. However, 3 spiritual seals suddenly appeared on his fingertips. What is he doing? Wen Ling and the others also became aware of Mu Chen's action and were stunned. However, their color of their faces instantly changed as they noticed Mu Chen flicking the 3 spiritual seals over and it landed above Chen Ling. These 3 spiritual seals quickly fused into the air. Then, Wen Ling and the others were able to see spiritual energy light beams rapidly extending out and the incomplete portion of the spiritual array were being drawn out. It's the shattered portion of Chen Ling's spiritual array. Wen Ling and the others had a keen vision over the others. They instantly saw that the portion of the spiritual array that Mu Chen had drawn out was Chen Ling's shattered portion of the spiritual array. However, they were immediately astounded. How was this possible? Mu Chen had always been studying about the spiritual array portion that he was responsible for. Moreover, he had never made contact with the Chen Ling's portion. How could he form out the missing portion this quickly and without any mistakes? Wen Ling exchanged glances with each other and saw the surprise within each other's eyes. Then, they discovered that Mu Chen had kept his eyes shut the entire time. In other words, he did not need to see it at all and he formed the shattered portion out. How could this be possible? The other 2 spiritual array masters were speechless. Wen Ling was also surprised. He fixed his sight at Mu Chen, who had his eyes closed while his fingers trembled. Then, his eyes focused and he slowly said. He seems to have entered the state of heart array. Heart array state. Chen Ling and the others hesitated for a moment before gasping. Their eyes were filled with an incredulous expression. Isn't the heart array state only possible for spiritual array masters, who are at least rank 3? How could he enter such a state? Wen Ling also felt incredulous, yet he only said with a bitter smile. I am not too sure as well. He seemed to possess great talent within the areas of spiritual arrays. Although this situation is rare, it has appeared before. A few highly gifted individuals would be able to rely on a certain catalyst to enter this state before reaching rank 3 spiritual array master. Chen Ling and the others were completely speechless. Soon, they were filled with envy. They would probably never enter this state within their lifetime. However, the boy in front of them seemed to have entered it inadvertently. It really made them sigh deep down within their hearts. Chen Ling, control the rest of your spiritual array to connect it with Mu Chen's. Then, continue to combine the array. Wen Ling said in a deep voice. Hearing this, Chen Ling nodded. He carefully controlled the incomplete spiritual array and slowly connected it to the part that Mu Chen had saved. Combine the array. Hearing Wen Ling's shout, Chen Ling and the others urged the spiritual arrays to connect once again. This time, no accidents occurred and the 5 spiritual arrays merged together perfectly. All of a sudden, a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation burst out from mid-air. A large brilliance enshrouded the light barrier and everybody within the Mu territory could feel that the spiritual aura within the world was gathering in the direction of the square. Success. Wen Ling and the others stared at the complex spiritual array that enveloped the sky above the square. A sense of relief and delight poured out from their eyes. Outside of the venue, Mu Feng also had an excited expression as he saw that the situation took a dramatic turn. Gradually, Wen Ling and the others detached their thoughts away from the spirit convergence array and stared complicatedly at the boy nearby. At this moment, the boy gradually opened his eyes. He looked at Wen Ling and the others as he scratched his head. With a slightly dazed voice, he said, "We finished it." Hearing this, Wen Ling and the others' faces completely stiffened. Chapter 73 Seated Entry. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 73, Seated Entry. You don't know what happened. Wen Ling could not help but ask as Mu Chen's confusion showed. Mu Chen frowned. He vaguely remembered that he seemed to have entered a certain state earlier. However, he was not particularly clear about what had just happened. Earlier, you have entered the heart array state. Wen Ling said softly. Heart array state. Mu Chen was surprised. It is a mysterious state you would only be able to touch after you become a rank 3 spiritual array master. At that time, you will be able to get rid of the binds of the naked eye and use your heart to observe the array. All of the trajectories of the spiritual array would be within your heart and it will move based on your thoughts. Wen Ling stared at Mu Chen and said, an accident occurred for the spirit convergence array earlier and it was going to fail. However, it seems that you have unconsciously saved it. Mu Chen was slightly stunned. He seemed to have remembered that the spirit convergence array had completely reflected itself within his heart. Moreover, the originally completed spiritual array seemed to have a flaw at the final moment. Then, at a conditioned reflex, he seemed to have done something to it. So that is called heart array state. Curiosity filled Mu Chen's eyes. Under that state, he could feel that it has become a lot easier to arrange a spiritual array and the spiritual energy light beams would move based on his thoughts. The feeling like how water floods in made him feel extremely comfortable. However, based on your appearance, it seems that you have unconsciously entered that mysterious state. You must try to comprehend that feeling more. If you are able to control whether or not you can enter the heart array state, it will greatly benefit your spiritual array cultivation. Wen Ling smacked his lips. This time, he could not conceal the jealousy within his tone. The heart array state, it is a state that many spiritual array masters would dream of. Even he had never experienced it before. Beside him, Chen Ling and the other spiritual array master also stared at Mu Chen with a complex expression. They did not have the slightest mentality of looking down on him. They understood that the boy in front of them was probably at a completely different level. Perhaps in the near future, they would be looking up at the boy, who had once humbly asked for advice. Haha, thank you, everybody. You've done a great deed to the Mu territory since you've constructed the rank 2 spirit convergence array this time. At this moment, Mu Feng walked in from the outside with a delighted expression. Then, he cupped his fist and thanked Wen Ling, Chen Ling and the other. Wen Ling let out a faint smile. Moreover, Chen Ling and the others had slightly reddened faces. They had nearly ruined the entire thing. If it wasn't for Mu Chen entering the heart array state, they would probably cause the Mu territory to have a major loss. Territory Lord Mu, the ones who performed the majority of this service are Brother Wen and the Little Lord. Chen Ling said embarrassedly. Mr. Chen Ling, what are you saying? There is no size of this service. Without the 3 of you, how could we have arranged this spirit convergence array? Mu Feng said in a stern voice. Hearing this, Chen Ling and the others also emotionally cupped their hands. They did not have arrogance within their eyes anymore. For Mu Feng to be the Mu territory's lord, his tolerance was really impressive. In the future, they might decide to move around the Mu territory more. Furthermore, Mu Chen's talent in spiritual array cultivation was extremely terrifying. He will reach a staggering height in this aspect. At that time, they would benefit greatly if they were able to get some pointers from him. Mu Chen also quietly smiled when he saw Mu Feng's act of winning them over. His own father was quite crafty. There aren't many spiritual array masters in the northern spiritual realm. If they were able to rope in 3 rank 1 spiritual array master, it would be a considerable assistance. Because Wen Ling and the others have also consumed a lot of strength due to the rank 2 spirit convergence array, Mu Feng only talked with them briefly before sending them off so they could rest. Afterwards, he let out a sigh of relief and smiled as he stared at Mu Chen beside him. Good boy, it's all thanks to you this time. You are my father, of course I have to help you. Mu Chen grinned as he spoke. Damn brat. Mu Feng scolded him for a moment before rubbing Mu Chen's head. He sighed and said. If you want to help me, then hurry and get admitted to the 5 great academies. The northern spiritual realm may seem very big, but we are only a group of visionless toads sitting within a well. You will only be qualified to become a true powerhouse if you obtain the resources and education from the 5 great academies. Your talent far surpasses me, your father. Therefore, you will walk much farther than me and you will be able to do things that your father cannot do. Mu Feng muttered to himself. You are all my hope. Mu Chen stared at Mu Feng's gentle and comforting eyes and smiled. Dad, relax. I have said it before, there will be a day when I bring mother back. Mu Feng laughed. He only felt that his eyes started to become obscure and firmly nodded his head. He believed that his son would never let him down. I'll head back to the Northern Spiritual Academy tomorrow. After calculating the time, the spaces within the 5 great academies should have been sent over by now. I'll see how many spaces were assigned to the Northern Spiritual Academy this time. Mu Chen stretched his waist and his black eyes stared at the red glow on the horizon. An elegant and soft figure was reflected within the depths of his eyes. She seemed to have long silver hair as well as a pair of glass-like eyes. Her exquisite and tiny face, which would definitely create a calamity in the future, would often be covered with a coldness that separated others away from her. However, only he knew how gentle she was underneath that coldness. The 5 great academies that I really have to go there. The next day. After Mu Chen said farewell to Mu Feng, he used the Mu territory's transfer spiritual array to hurry back to Northern Spiritual City. However, he did not stay within the city for long and headed straight back to the Northern Spiritual Academy. At this moment, 3 figures were sitting up straight in a study within the Northern Spiritual Academy. The principal of the Northern Spiritual Academy, Xiao Mu, was in the front. Behind him on the left and right were the 2 highest level of instructors within the Northern Spiritual Academy, Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi. The spaces for the 5 great academy have been sent over. Within Principal Zhao's hand, he held a golden picture scroll. On the picture scroll, there were 5 different, yet extremely oppressive emblems. These 5 emblems represent the 5 great academies. How many spaces did our Northern Spiritual Academy obtain this time? Teacher Mo asked interestedly. Principal Zhao's dry fingers gently touched the golden picture scroll within his hand. He said with a strange expression. 5 entries. 5. Teacher Mo thought for a moment before saying. There are only 5 students within the East Branch, who would be eligible to reach the spiritual rotation stage in a short period of time. As for the West Branch, there will probably be 7 students. It seems that there will be a fierce competition for it. Principal Xiao nodded his head. The requirements for the 5 great academies were quite harsh. It isn't a place where you can enter just by wanting to enter it. Moreover, aside from these 5 entries, there is a special entry. Principal Zhao's expression became increasingly strange as he stared at Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi. A special entry. Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi stared and puzzled at Principal Zhao. It is a seated, class entry. Principal Zhao said as he lowered the golden picture scroll within his hand. A seated, class entry. Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi's faces finally became serious and they could not help but ask. How could they hand over this sort of entry to our Northern Spiritual Academy? The 5 Great Academies entries were divided into 3 classes. The lowest class was the ordinary entries. The second level was the seated, class entries. Right now, the Northern Spiritual Academy had received this type of special entry. However, these entries would only be obtained by powerful academies. A spiritual academy like the Northern Spiritual Academy should never obtain this level of entry. The highest level entry was the core entries. It is extremely rare and everyone, who earned it, were monster-like existences. Only the most dazzling individuals in the spiritual road would be able to obtain it. Moreover, these entries were not just in name. It would also provide you an identity after you've decided which one of the 5 great academies you'll enter. The status and resources you'll obtain would depend on it. Thus, many people would fight to the bitter end in order to obtain this high-class entry. A seated, class entry. After including all the spiritual academies, there will only be 20 of them within the 100 spirit heavens that I can't believe that one would actually land in our Northern Spiritual Academy's hands. Principal Zhao let out a strange laugh as if it was incomprehensible. 100 spirit heavens is the vast land outside of the Northern Spiritual Realm. Within the 100 spirit heavens, there were dozens of large and small realms and the Northern Spiritual Realm was only a relatively weak realm. Therefore, the Northern Spiritual Academy would not be able to obtain an advantage over all the other spiritual academies within the 100 spirit heavens. If it was in the past, this seated, class entry would definitely be divided through the other powerful spiritual academies within the 100 spirit heavens. How could it be their turn? I've heard a little bit of information. This seated, class entry was probably allocated to us directly due to a decision of the 5 great academies. Principal Zhao said faintly. Oh. A decision from the 5 great academies. Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi exchanged gazes with each other. Just what sort of existence are the 5 great academies? Why would they take care of a measly Northern Spiritual Academy? Moreover, they did not have any powerful figures within the 5 great academies. We aren't the ones that obtained it. Principal Zhao narrowed his eyes slightly. I think that it might be a certain student within the Northern Spiritual Academy who has attracted the attention of the 5 great academies. Student. Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi was stunned. Then, their eyes immediately lit up. It's Mu Chen. Within the entire Northern Spiritual Realm, Mu Chen was the only one who had participated in the spiritual road. Moreover, he had surprisingly been kicked out halfway. This was extremely difficult to understand and also made thoughts flash through other people's mind. Just what on earth did Mu Chen do in the spiritual road? Principal Zhao slowly nodded his head and said. It should be that little guy, the 5 great academies kicked him out of the spiritual road, yet they purposely handed a seated, class entry to us. What is the meaning of this? Is it to compensate him? Or are they reluctant to let him go? Reluctant to let him go? To the 5 great academies, what genius haven't they seen? It's only Mu Chen, it shouldn't be enough, right? Teacher Shi frowned. Teacher Mo let out a faint smile and said. You should not underestimate a person who killed a vicious individual, who was at the spiritual rotation stage late phase, by relying on his spiritual movement stage late phase strength. Principal Zhao smiled and waved his head as he said. We should not care what the 5 great academies are thinking of. Since they handed this entry to us, we should just take it. Then what about the entry? Should we hand it directly to Mu Chen? Teacher Mo inquired. Principal Xiao shook his head and said. That would only lead to dissatisfaction with the other students. Moreover, if the territory lords within the Northern Spiritual Academy knew that we actually have a seated class entry, wouldn't they all be envious of it? If we handed it to Mu Chen, they would all be filled with fury and say that we were unfair. Then, Principal Xiao stood up and let out a faint smile as he said. We'll follow the rules. Strength is supreme. We will hand over this seated class entry to whoever is the strongest. Although it is possible that it was prepared for Mu Chen, he can only blame himself if he does not have the strength. As he said this, he waved his hand. Convey the news out. I think that many little guys would go crazy about it. Oh ho ho, a seated class entry. It is the first one since the establishment of the Northern Spiritual Academy. Chapter 74 Chen Fan, Huiyun. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 74, Chen Fan, Huiyun. Northern Spiritual Academy, East Branch, Training Grounds. It was evident that the training grounds were quite lively today. It seems that every East Branch Heaven class student came. This is because today was the day that the Northern Spiritual Academy would announce the amount of entries for the 5 great academies. Most of the students, who came to train in the Northern Spiritual Academy, came for the entries of the 5 great academies. They would work hard year after year in order to use the Northern Spiritual Academy as a stepping stone and enter the rumored 5 great academies. When Mu Chen entered the training grounds, he was startled by the loud noise. He looked at the tightly packed heads and secretly smacked his lips. He never imagined that there will be so many students in the East Branch's Heaven class. Mu Chen, over here. Not far away, a girl's sweet voice rang out. Mu Chen turned his gaze over and saw Tang Qianair waving her slender hands at him. The moving smile on her pretty face attracted a lot of attention from the youths nearby. Mu Chen also directed a smile towards Tang Qianair and walked over. They had not met in a month. This young girl has increasingly become more slim and graceful. Although she was dressed in black training clothes, it is still possible to see her exquisite curves. I haven't seen you in 1 month, yet why do I feel that you've changed a bit? Tang Qianair tilted her head and asked in surprise as she glanced at Mu Chen. After all, Mu Chen had stepped into the spiritual rotation stage. Even though he had not revealed it, a girl is indeed perceptive and could still feel a little bit of change. I nearly died inside the Black Yiri swamp. Of course, I'll change a bit. Mu Chen smiled and said. You also went to the Black Yiri swamp. I heard from my father that the Mu territory seemed to have fought with the Lu territory within the Black Yiri swamp. I never imagined that you would have gone as well. Are you okay? Tang Qianair frowned and asked. Mu Chen shook his head. It seems, on that day, the commotion within the Black Yiri swamp was quite large. Even the Tang territory had received news about it. However, it seems that they did not know that the commotion was caused by the 9 Netherbirds' evolution. Brother Mu! A shout suddenly rang out from nearby. He noticed that Mo Ling, Tan Qingshan and the others all walked over with a smile. It seems that they have seriously trained during this month and appeared to be darker, especially Mo Ling. Mu Chen could feel that the spiritual energy within his body had become increasingly dense. It was only a step away from advancing to spiritual rotation stage. Hee, Brother Mu. It's all thanks to the jaded essence fruit you've gave me last time. I will probably reach the spiritual rotation stage soon. When that happens, I'll leave you behind. Mo Ling directed a smile at Mu Chen and spoke. Mu Chen smiled as he glanced at him. He was too lazy to correct him. I wonder how many entries the Northern Spiritual Academy will receive. Last time, it seemed to be 3 entries only. The East and West branch fought to the bitter end for those 3 entries. Mo Ling licked his lips. His eyes twinkled as he talked about the entries. It was apparent that he really wanted it. Mu Chen also nodded his head. But just when he was about to speak, he heard a commotion coming from behind. He turned his head around and noticed two figures slowly walking over. Ha! It's Chen Fan and Hua Yun.So. These two guys finally decided to appear. Mo Ling whispered as he looked at the two men and was a little surprised. Hearing this, Mu Chen was also shocked. He glanced at the two individuals for a moment. When he was in the Earth class, he had heard of these two names. Based on their strength, they were probably at the pinnacle of the East Branch's Heaven class. They were only slightly weaker than Lu Mubai. However, they were rather low-key and would rarely appear in the Northern Spiritual Academy. Therefore, their names would never appear in the rankings. It was rumored that they joined an adventurers team and would often hunt spiritual beasts. Mo Ling said. Only then, Mu Chen nodded his head suddenly. No wonder he could feel a faint smell of blood from them. Moreover, from their calm eyes, it was indeed different from the youthful students nearby. Most likely, these two individuals have already attempted to charge into the spiritual rotation stage. Mu Chen said softly. He could feel that the spiritual energy fluctuation from their bodies were even stronger than Mo Ling. It seems that they have gradually condensed a spiritual wheel. It's those two. Tang Qianair whispered as her beautiful eyes stared at them. Mu Chen could hear that her tone had changed and could not help but glance at her in confusion. He, brother Mu. Chen Fan and Hui Yun knew each other since they were young. Both of them had fought against each other as they grew up. Moreover, they both fell in love with Qianair after entering the Northern Spiritual Academy and would often fight with each other because of her. However, they were both rejected by her in the end. Then, these two grouped together and joined an adventurers team to train. They said that they would court her again after they obtained the entries for the 5 great academies. Mo Ling whispered on the side. Mu Chen was stunned. He immediately glanced with a funny expression at Tang Qianair, who had a red face. The attractiveness of the East Branch's flower really couldn't be covered and would come wave after wave. While Mu Chen was talking with Mo Ling, Chen Fan and Hui Yun also looked over to this side. To be exact, they saw Tang Qianair beside Mu Chen and a smile emerged on their indifferent faces as they walked quickly over. Seeing that they were coming for her, Tang Qianair helplessly bit her lips and hid her body behind Mu Chen. This tiny action made Chen Fan and Hui Yun completely stunned. They immediately fixated their gaze over at Mu Chen. Chen Fan's gaze was still alright, but Hui Yun had an ill gaze. You should be Mu Chen, right? I've heard of your name before. So we finally meet today. Chen Fan gave a faint smile at Mu Chen and held out his hand. Nice to meet you. Mu Chen also replied with a smile and glanced at Chen Fan's outstretched hand. Then, he immediately shook it. The moment when the two hands clasped with each other, spiritual energy surged out from Chen Fan's palm and the veins jumped on the arm that gripped Mu Chen's hand. Mu Chen could feel a powerful squeeze coming from the palm and helplessly shook his head. He did not resist and allowed Chen Fan to utilize his strength. However, his face did not have the slightest movement. Chen Fan, what are you doing? Tang Qianair also noticed this scene and immediately frowned and shouted out. Chen Fan stared at the trace of ridicule at the corner of Mu Chen's mouth and frowned as well. This Mu Chen really had some ability. Oh ho, Qianair. I only had a teasing inclination. It's been a while since such an amazing person has appeared in our East Branch. Chen Fan retracted back his hand and smiled at Tang Qianair. Brother Mu Chen probably didn't mind, right? Chen Fan looked at Mu Chen. If it's only this amount of strength, naturally, I wouldn't mind. Mu Chen smiled and said. Then we definitely should have a duel sometime. Hui Yun challenged Mu Chen as he spoke. We'll talk about it when you have the chance. Mu Chen did not make any comments and ignored these two individuals as he walked towards the direction of the training grounds. On the other hand, Tang Qianair gave off a fierce glare at the two of them before following Mu Chen. Could Qianair have fallen in love with that boy? Wouldn't we have benefited someone else because we were fighting with each other all the time? Huiyun glanced at Tang Qianair's figure and muttered. That will depend if he has the ability to let us allow him to do so. Chen Fan rubbed his chin and said. Let's find an opportunity to beat him up. Huiyun said. Okay. Chen Fan smiled and nodded his head. More and more students appeared in the training ground. After approximately 30 minutes, a familiar figure slowly walked out. The commotions at this place instantly quieted down and stared eagerly at Teacher Mo, who walked over to the training grounds. Teacher Mo glanced at the tightly packed heads and let out a faint smile. He cut straight to the point and said. This time, the Northern Spiritual Academy has received five Great Academies entries. 5. An uproar suddenly burst out within the training grounds. Although there were more entries than last time, it was still quite short in supply for the qualified students. Moreover, Teacher Mo's eyes suddenly glanced at Mu Chen and said. Aside from the 5 entries, we also have a seated class entry. A seated class entry. All sounds seemed to have disappeared within the training grounds as looks of astonishment were directed at Teacher Mo. After a long period of them, a few people fiercely inhaled a breath. Even Chen Fan and Huiyun took in a deep breath. Mu Chen was probably the only person who remained calm. A seated class entry was indeed quite rare. However, if he had successfully completed the spiritual road, he would have probably obtained an even higher class entry. Only the strongest student within the Northern Spiritual Academy would qualify to obtain this seated class entry. Therefore, if you want to obtain it, you must defeat all other competitors. Teacher Mo stared at the shocked students and glanced once again at the calm Mu Chen. He smiled and said. Within our East Branch Heaven class, there are only 5 individuals who are qualified to compete for it. They are Chen Fan, Huiyun, Mo Ling, Tang Qianair, and Mu Chen. After hearing these 5 names, regretful sighs rang out from within the training grounds. However, they also understood. The ones who qualified for it must possess the ability to reach the spiritual rotation stage in a short period of time. In this location, only these 5 individuals would meet this requirement. For the next month, I will personally guide the 5 of you individually and allow you to complete the final step and advance into the spiritual rotation stage. Teacher Mo said in a deep voice. Yes. Hearing this, Mo Ling and the others nodded excitedly. Teacher Mo was a spirit stage powerhouse. If he was to personally guide them, their cultivation would be smoother. However, Mu Chen smiled helplessly and hesitated for a moment before holding up his hand. Mu Chen, do you have a question? Seeing Mu Chen raise his head, he asked in confusion. Teacher Mo, that step is probably unnecessary for me. Teacher Mo was stunned. He immediately guessed what that meant and his eyes fixated itself onto Mu Chen's body. Then, he could feel the spiritual energy fluctuation within the latter's body was different than the rest of the students. Why that you've advanced to the spiritual rotation stage? Teacher Mo exclaimed. Wa. Sounds of wowing erupted out from nearby. Not only did Tang Qianair, Mo Ling and the others stare in shock at Mu Chen, even Chen Fan and Huiyun opened their mouths slightly. This guy actually reached the spiritual rotation stage already. Chapter 75 Spiritual Arts Room 3 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 75 Spiritual Arts Room 3 Floor in the training grounds, the atmosphere turned into an uproar due to the sudden and explosive news. Everyone's gaze fixated onto the figure of the young boy. Spiritual rotation stage. Although there were many excellent students within the current Northern Spiritual Academy, who have reached the critical point of their breakthroughs, there was only one person who managed to advance into that level. Based on everybody's knowledge, that person is the West Branch's Lu Mubai. He is also the strongest student within the Northern Spiritual Academy. However, a second one had appeared in the East Branch now. At the side, Mo Ling and the others stared blankly at Mu Chen. Then, he immediately let out a bitter laugh. Previously, he still tried to show off, yet he never knew that Mu Chen had left him in the dust a long time ago. What an insane person. Mo Ling and Tan Qingshan exchanged gazes with each other and saw this thought emerging from within their eyes. Especially the latter one, he had originally ascended to heaven class together with Mu Chen. However, right now he had only reached spiritual movement stage middle phase, yet Mu Chen had already surpassed him by far. He really is a tough nut to beat. Chen Fan and Hui Yun's expression became solemn. Although the spiritual energy within their aura sea had shown traces of condensing into a wheel, they were still quite far from reaching the actual spiritual rotation stage. Staring at the boy in front of them wearing a calm and composed expression, they were flabbergasted. It seems that this competitor would be difficult to deal with. Teacher Mo waved his hand and stopped the noise within the training grounds. He stared deeply at Mu Chen before saying, "Although you managed to enter the spiritual rotation stage, you should still remain in the Northern Spiritual Academy during the next month. It would probably be beneficial to you as well." After hearing this, Mu Chen's heart moved slightly. He looked at Teacher Mo and nodded his head without saying anything. "Alright, everyone should train by themselves now. Mu Chen, follow me for a moment." Teacher Mo waved his hands and left the training's grounds. Seeing this, Mu Chen immediately followed him. With the departure of these two men, the training grounds became an uproar completely. It was evident that they were still immersed in the shock that Mu Chen had already advanced into the spiritual rotation stage. Mu Chen ignored the uproar that he had caused and walked forward. Then he saw Teacher Mo with his hands behind his back. "Mu Chen, I think that you should be able to guess why our Northern Spiritual Academy obtained a seated class entry." Teacher Mo laughed as he looked at Mu Chen. Although the latter was only a youthful boy, he understood that Mu Chen was quite mature and more cautious than any battle-hardened veterans. "Is it because of me?" Mu Chen, indeed, managed to predict it a bit. A seated class entry was considerably rare even within the 100 spirit heavens, not to mention about the Northern Spiritual Realm. Therefore, it would not have landed within the Northern Spiritual Academy unless of a special reason. Teacher Mo nodded his head and said, "Indeed, it is related to you. However, Principal Xiao does not intend to hand the seated entry to you directly. I understand, that thing is too attractive. If it was handed over to me, it wouldn't be good to the Northern Spiritual Academy." Mu Chen was not particularly surprised. The Northern Spiritual Academy has always remained neutral. If it were to be given to him so easily, others probably would not see things favorably. And Mu Chen let out a laugh. The boy's smile seemed to be a little bit conceited, yet it did not annoy anyone. "Since it belongs to me, I will rely on myself to obtain it. I don't need others generously gifting it to me." Teacher Mo was stunned for a moment. He couldn't resist laughing out loud and a hint of admiration passed through his eyes. "You sure feel confident about it. If you're competing to obtain the seated class entry, you should know who is the greatest opponent for you, right?" "Lu Mubai." Mu Chen shrugged. Although that person was indeed quite annoying, Mu Chen had to admit that he had quite the strength. "Do you know Lu Mubai's strength?" Teacher Mo asked again. BL.net, he should have advanced into the spiritual rotation stage a long time ago. Although the rumors within the Northern Spiritual Academy say that he is in the spiritual rotation stage initial phase, I feel that he is probably stronger than that. Mu Chen thought for a moment before saying this. He had fought against Lu Mubai earlier and the latter had definitely concealed a part of his strength. Yes, Lu Mubai currently might be in the spiritual rotation stage middle phase. Teacher Mo nodded and he spoke. As expected. Mu Chen narrowed his eyes. He was indeed a formidable opponent. However, he had also advanced into the spiritual rotation stage right now. Mu Chen wasn't exactly afraid of him if they had to fight. Moreover, Lu Mubai refused Teacher Shi's personal guidance when he heard about the news of a seeded class entry and headed straight back to the Lu territory. Furthermore, he even took 1 month off. Teacher Mo said with a faint smile. He refused Teacher Shi's guidance. Mu Chen was slightly surprised. Teacher Shi was still a genuine spirit stage powerhouse. Ordinary students would not be able to receive his personal guidance, yet Lu Mubai actually ignored it. There must be a reason why he chose to do this. It means that he believes that the Lu territory has some sort of method to greatly improve his strength. Teacher Mo said softly. Mu Chen nodded his head seriously. Although Lu Qingtian was a spirit stage powerhouse, he did not believe that Lu Qingtian would be better than Teacher Shi if it was about guidance for cultivation. Then where did this belief of his come from? Mu Chen bit his lips as he felt a sense of crisis. The most frightening thing were the unknown facts. During this 1 month, I will also teach you personally. Of course, if you believe that you will be able to improve more rapidly in the Mu territory, I will not stop you. Teacher Mo smiled as he spoke. Teacher Mo, don't joke around. Although my father is also at the spirit stage, he has never taught others regarding cultivation. He is not good at it. Mu Chen said helplessly. Mu Feng's strength might be stronger than Teacher Mo's, but he was not suitable to teach others about cultivation. Teacher Mo smiled and said. Since that's the case, I will personally teach you during this 1 month. But before this, I will first talk about the compensation that the Northern Spiritual Academy would be handing to you. Compensation. Mu Chen was startled. He immediately shook his head and said. Is it about the seeded class entry? Teacher Mo, the Northern Spiritual Academy did not do anything wrong. Moreover, I do not feel that I've lost anything. Oh ho ho, Principal Xiao was the one to say it. No matter what, you are the reason why the Northern Spiritual Academy obtained this seeded class entry. If you think that compensation does not sound good, then you can change it to a reward. Teacher Mo smiled. Then, fine. Mu Chen scratched his head and did not refuse it anymore. Since the Northern Spiritual Academy was going to give him some benefits, it would be too pretentious if he continued to reject it. Then follow me to the Spiritual Arts Room. Teacher Mo smiled. Spiritual Arts Room. Mu Chen was stunned. Weren't you interested in the Spiritual Arts Room's 3rd floor? This time, I'll let you enter it. Teacher Mo gave a faint laugh before turning around and walking away. The Spiritual Arts Room's 3rd floor. Mu Chen licked his lips. A hint of delight surged out from his eyes. The Spiritual Arts Room's 3rd floor contains the most powerful spiritual arts within the Northern Spiritual Academy's collection. The collection over there must be many times more bountiful than his father's collection. It seems that the Northern Spiritual Academy really decided to pay a price. The Spiritual Arts Room's 3rd floor is a place that very few students would be able to enter. At that location, the spiritual arts were all at least spiritual tier. Mu Chen's heart was filled with excitement and he quickly followed. He followed Teacher Mo as they went all the way through the Northern Spiritual Academy and directly entered the Spiritual Arts Room. Then, they headed straight towards the 2nd floor. At this moment, a few heaven-class students were searching through spiritual arts. They were surprised when they saw Teacher Mo bringing Mu Chen up here. Mu Chen. A voice came from the side and Mu Chen looked over towards the red dress. It was evident that the charming Hong Ling was staring at him with her mouth slightly opened. Senior Hong Ling. Mu Chen gave a slight smile and directed a nod towards Hong Ling. However, he did not say much more and directly followed Teacher Mo to the depths of the 2nd floor. At that location, there was a faint light barrier. A dense spiritual energy fluctuation emitted out from the light barrier. The two of them stopped in front of the light barrier and caused the students on the 2nd floor to turn their gaze over at them. They knew that this was the passageway to the spiritual art room's 3rd floor. However, no students were ever permitted to enter. Teacher Mo, what are you doing? A few heaven class students stared in astonishment at Teacher Mo and Mu Chen. Their eyes flashed as if they understood. Then, a surge of surprise filled their eyes. No way. While they exclaimed in a low voice, Teacher Mo waved his sleeves and cracks slowly appeared on the light barrier. However, just when he was about to bring Mu Chen in, a voice suddenly rang out from behind. Teacher Mo, why is he allowed to enter the 3rd floor? Teacher Mo stopped for a moment and turned around. He could see many heaven class students staring angrily over at this location. Moreover, many of their eyes were filled with jealousy and unwillingness. They had longed to enter the spiritual arts room 3rd floor, yet they were not qualified to enter. However, seeing Teacher Mo bring Mu Chen in, it instantly imbalanced their psychological state. Teacher Mo swept his eyes across them and said in a faint voice. This is because his performance in the spiritual road has helped us to secure the first ever seated class entry for the Northern Spiritual Academy. Is this reason enough? The entire spiritual arts room's 2nd floor instantly became silent. Numerous incredulous gazes began to fixate themselves onto Mu Chen. So the first ever seated class entry of the Northern Spiritual Academy came because of him. Wasn't he kicked out of the spiritual road halfway through? Why would the 5 great academies still purposely hand over a seated class entry to the Northern Spiritual Academy? Hong Ling could not help but conceal her lips with her slender hand. She immediately stared complicatedly at the boy, who had become the center of attention. The boy that had been ordinary within her eyes had slowly emitted out heat and light, causing him to become dazzling. Seeing that nobody was questioning him anymore, Teacher Mo waved his hand and walked past the light barrier. Mu Chen also followed him immediately. After the 2 individuals disappeared behind the light barrier, the spiritual arts room 2 floor was still completely silent. It was evident that they were still immersed in the shock brought by the sudden news. Chapter 76 2 Spiritual Arts. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 76 2 Spiritual Arts. The 3rd floor of the spiritual arts room was not as luxurious as imagined by Mu Chen. Instead, it was quite simple. It seemed like an ordinary attic, yet the spotless floor made others understand the importance of this place to the Northern Spiritual Academy due to its maintenance. It was the first time Mu Chen had entered the treasured location, which every single Northern Spiritual Academy student would drool about, and he immediately looked around curiously. Teacher Mo walked forward. In the center of the attic, there was a bluestone platform. A delicate jade box was placed neatly on top of the bluestone platform. He waved his hand and the jade box opened. A light slowly floated out and many jaded scripts of different color were within the light. These are all spiritual tier spiritual art. You can pick from them. Teacher Mo stared at Mu Chen and smiled. These are all spiritual tier spiritual arts. Mu Chen stared at the dozen lights and could not help but smack his lips. As expected from the Northern Spiritual Academy, this collection was many times more powerful than his father's collection. Mu Chen hurriedly walked up and eagerness filled his eyes. He did not train in many spiritual arts right now, and the only one that could be displayed was the Limitless Death Seal. Moreover, it may have a high potential, but it was still common tier. As for the Great Pagoda art, it was too profound. It also could not bring obvious benefits to Mu Chen currently. Therefore, he needed this level of spiritual art to increase his combat abilities. Otherwise, he did not believe he would be able to defeat Lu Mubai, who returned to the Lu territory to prepare, 1 month later. Mu Chen stretched out his hand and a clump of light appeared within his hand. The light faded away and a brown-colored jaded script floated out. He glanced at it for a moment. Earth Spirit Wave, Spiritual Tier Low Rank. This seems to be a script for a spiritual tier low rank attack spiritual art. Mu Chen pondered for a moment, yet he shook his head. Although this spiritual art was pretty good, it did not feel like it suited him. Mu Chen lowered the spiritual art within his hand and looked at the other ones. Teacher Mo stood at a corner and quietly watched. After 10 minutes since Mu Chen had started the selection, his eyes had finally lit up. Then, he stared in great interest at the jaded script in his hand. This jaded script was a faint cyan color. However, it was not an attack spiritual art, but a movement spiritual art. Moreover, its rank was not that low as well. Shadow Spirit Step, spiritual rank middle rank. If this spiritual art was to be trained to the great achievement stage, your figure would be like a spirit while the afterimages would confuse others. It was also untraceable. Mu Chen had learned a few movement spiritual arts before, but these movement spiritual arts were too ordinary. It was still the first time for him to see one of this level. Done. You really have a pretty good discerning eye. You've picked one of the few spiritual tier middle rank spiritual arts. Seeing this, Teacher Mo let out a faint smile and spoke. Mu Chen smiled embarrassedly before he stared at the spiritual arts reluctantly. He actually also took a liking to an attack spiritual art. However, it would seem that he was too greedy if he picked another one. You've taken a liking to another one. However, Teacher Mo still noticed his expression and immediately frowned as he asked. Mu Chen smiled awkwardly. I originally planned on letting you select one spiritual art as compensation. Teacher Mo stared at the resentful Mu Chen that was rubbing his head. He thought about it for a moment before he said with a smile, however, I can make an exception to it and allow you to select one more. However, there is a condition. What is the condition? Mu Chen hurriedly asked. You must guarantee that you'll defeat Lu Mubai and let the Northern Spiritual Academy East Branch obtain the seeded class entry, Teacher Mo said. Mu Chen was surprised for a moment. This was originally his goal. He stared at Teacher Mo's eyes that contained a smile and seemed to have understood the meaning behind it. He immediately nodded his head, Don't worry, Teacher Mo. I will not let others obtain what belongs to me. Teacher Mo smiled as he waved his head, Since that's the case, then I'll watch your performance. Choose it. Mu Chen nodded his head gratefully. Then, he did not hesitate and grabbed onto a jaded script amongst the ones that he had looked at. Ancient light writings emerged on top of the jaded script. Spirit King Finger, spiritual tier low rank. It walks down the path of fierceness and hardness. Moreover, it allows the finger to be like metal and could fracture bones. This was a spiritual art that trains the fingers. Mu Chen was quite interested in it. In the past, he had trained in a threat-level finger spiritual art. He was extremely satisfied with this type of attack, which was sharp and lethal without using weapons. Oh. It's actually a finger spiritual art. Teacher Mo was also stunned for a moment when he noticed Mu Chen selecting this spiritual art. It was quite painful to train in this sort of spiritual art. This is because it requires you to train solely your fingers. Moreover, during the training period, the pain caused by training your fingers was not something an ordinary person could endure. After all, the nerves of the fingertips are linked with the heart. I've gotten accustomed to it. Mu Chen smiled. There was no power that you could obtain without effort. If you want to obtain it, you would naturally have to pay a price. Teacher Mo nodded his head. He felt even more satisfied regarding the boy in front of him. He has talent, yet he was not conceited nor was he reckless. He could endure what ordinary people could not endure. A boy like this was considered to be the most excellent student he had seen through the many years of teaching in the Northern Spiritual Academy. During this 1 month, I will help you with the training of these 2 spiritual arts and allow you to succeed in it as soon as possible. Teacher Mo waved his hand before he walked out of the building. I will not disappoint Teacher Mo. Mu Chen stared at the back of Teacher Mo and nodded his head heavily. He was not a person who would only talk about how grateful he is to another person. Teacher Mo had helped him greatly, so what he needed to do was not to disappoint him. It would be enough if he snatches the seeded class entry away. Lu Mubai. Let us have a good fight this time. Lu territory, inside the Lu estate. Seeded class entry. Within the room, the Lu territory lord, Lu Qingtian, immediately sat up when he heard these words. He stared in surprise while revealing a hint of excitement at Lu Mubai as he said, "How is it possible for the Northern Spiritual Academy to obtain a seeded class entry? I'm not too sure as well." Lu Mubai shook his head and said, "However, it is indeed true. A seeded class entry. This is probably the first time that the Northern Spiritual Academy has obtained it, right? If Lu Mubai is able to obtain this seeded class entry, he would definitely obtain better resources when he entered the 5 great academies. His achievements would also surpass ordinary 5 great academies students." Lu Zong was also shocked by the news, but he immediately said with a delighted expression. They were aware that a student who obtained the seeded class entry would be in a different level compared to an ordinary student. If Mubai becomes a seeded student in the 5 great academies, perhaps he would have reached the 3 heaven stage by the time he graduated. At that time, not only would the Lu territory become the Northern Spiritual Realm's lord, we would even obtain a decent position in the 100 spirit heavens. Lu Ming laughed. Lu Qingtian licked his lips and stared eagerly at Lu Mubai as he said, "Mubai, no matter what price you have to pay, you must obtain the seeded class entry." "That's right. Within the Northern Spiritual Academy, who is the most threatening opponent to you?" Lu Mubai's eyes narrowed. He thought about the brief fight he had with Mu Chen in the Black Yuri Swamp. Although he had hid quite a bit of strength back then, he could feel, with his instincts, that Mu Chen seemed to have some other means as well. If there was still a student within the Northern Spiritual Academy that could cause him some uncertainty, it would probably be Mu Chen. Mu Chen. Lu Mubai replied. "Dad, this Mu Chen had obtained the qualifications to the spiritual road before. We cannot underestimate him too much." Mu Chen. That boy. Hearing this name, Lu Qingtian's eyes turned cold. He remembered that Mu Chen had lured the devouring spirit bees over in the Black Yuri Swamp and helped Mu Feng solve their dilemma. "Big brother, that boy is quite strange. Back then, Xue Tu went to kill him, who was only a spiritual movement stage middle phase, but in the end, he was the one who somehow died." Lu Ming also opened his mouth to speak. He could still remember deeply about the matter back then. Lu Qingtian nodded his head and a hint of coldness immediately surged through his face. He said, "The seeded class entry must fall into the hands of the Lu territory. Otherwise, it would be a calamity. Therefore, we must not make any mistakes about this matter. Mubai. From today onwards, you will enter the forbidden lands behind the mountain. Your grandfather will assist you with your training." Lu Qingtian's eyes flashed and he muttered. "Grandfather. Grandfather is inside the forbidden lands. Didn't he go missing 3 years ago?" Hearing this, Lu Mubai was surprised and became speechless. That is what is said at the outside. Your grandfather secluded himself to try and enter the 3 heaven stage. If we wait until that old man succeeds, wouldn't the Northern Spiritual Realm be completely controlled by our Lu territory? Lu Qingtian let out a dark laughing sound and said, "That group of idiots from the Mu territory thought that they would be safe if they hindered the Lu territory from obtaining the 9 Netherbird. Just you wait, as long as your grandfather comes out, I will make Mu Feng kneel down in front of me like a dog. An upstart force wants to compare backgrounds with my Lu territory. What an idiotic dream. Yes." Hearing this, Lu Mubai also had a hint of excitement flash through his eyes. If his grandfather could personally assist him, his strength would definitely increase greatly after 1 month. By then, who would care about Mu Chen? As he thought back about the shame that Mu Chen made him feel in the Black Yuri Swamp, Lu Mubai gritted his teeth tightly. A hint of cruelness appeared at his mouth. At that time, I want to trample you fiercely in front of everybody's face, that I in front of everybody, who had confidence in you. The most excellent youth in the northern spiritual realm is me, Lu Mubai, and not a trash like you. Chapter 77 Harsh Training. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 77, Harsh Training. Northern Spiritual Academy, behind the mountains. Over at this location, there was a lush forest as well as a huge waterfall. The waterfall hung down from the mountain like a silver water python as sounds of rumbling bombarded down. A mist rose up from it and emitted outwards. Teacher Mo had his hands behind his back as he stood in the empty space below the waterfall. In front of him, Mu Chen, Tang Qian'er, Mo Ling, Chen Fan and Hui Yun were all there. From today onwards, I will give each of you a specialized training. Aside from Mu Chen, the rest of you must officially advance to the spiritual rotation stage within the month. Otherwise, you will be disqualified and lose the rights to fight for the 5 Great Academies entries. Teacher Mo's gaze swept across the few people as he spoke faintly. Hearing these words, Tang Qian'er, Chen Fan and the others' expressions became serious. They trained at the Northern Spiritual Academy because of the 5 Great Academies entries. If they were to lose the qualifications, it would be a hard blow for them to resist. The 4 of you are currently at the pinnacle of spiritual movement stage late phase. Chen Fan and Hui Yun have even begun to attempt to condense a spiritual wheel. However, all of you are still a step away. Therefore, all of you will require using some external pressure in order to condense the spiritual energy into a wheel. External pressure. Chen Fan and the others exchanged gazes. Do you see this waterfall? Teacher Mo smiled and pointed at the waterfall, causing a rumbling sound behind him. Numerous currents flowed down and crashed into the rocks below with a massive energy. It splashed and caused the sky to be filled with mist. Starting from today, the 4 of you will sit beneath the waterfall and train. You will use all your spiritual energy to resist the impact of the waterfall. The external pressure will gradually seep into your body and gradually force the spiritual energy within your aura sea to condense into a wheel. Ah! Chen Fan and the others were astonished. Sitting and training underneath a waterfall. Wouldn't they become dizzy just after resisting this terrifying impact for a minute? There are no shortcuts for training. If you want to advance to the spiritual rotation stage within a month, you must take ruthless methods. If you can't even do this, then there's no need for you to compete for the entries. Teacher Mo said in a deep voice. Yes. The 4 of them hurriedly replied. If you do not have enough spiritual energy within your body, you can exit temporarily to recover your spiritual energy. Afterwards, you'll head back in. Teacher Mo swept his sharp eyes across them as he spoke. Yes, you can begin now. Teacher Mo waved his hand and said. Tang Qian'er and the others exchanged gazes. Then, they gritted their teeth as spiritual energy surged out from their bodies. Afterwards, their body moved and passed by the wide river before reaching the bottom of the waterfall. Bang bang bang. However, just when they reached the bottom of the waterfall, they did not even manage to sit cross-legged and were directly blown into the lake by the powerful impact. Every one of them became a drowning chicken. The 4 of them climbed out from the lake as their spiritual energy poured out constantly, and they forcibly resisted the impact from the water current as they sat down. Then, they gritted their teeth and endured the pain from the waterfall's impact. They stubbornly resisted it and circulated their spiritual energy. Mu Chen stared at the 4 individuals sitting cross-legged underneath the waterfall and secretly smacked his lips. This method of training was quite serious. It was indeed a demonic training. Mu Chen. Teacher Mo's gaze fixated on Mu Chen. This made the latter's heart jump and he felt a bad feeling. Did you read the 2 spiritual arts? Teacher Mo asked faintly. Mu Chen nodded his head. The training ground for you is over there. Teacher Mo pointed at a place down the river. Mu Chen turned his gaze over there and was suddenly numb. He could see that it was a location where the waterfall would fall down without hitting any obstacles. If you have to say it, the place where Tang Qian'er and the others were training had a few rocks above to ease the impact. As for him, it was completely vast and empty. There was nothing blocking it. And most importantly, there seemed to be only wooden logs with the size of his feet standing tall and upright underneath the waterfall. If you want to successfully learn the Shadow Spirit step, it is very simple. You only have to shuffle back and forth through those wooden logs without getting wet at all. Teacher Mo said. What? Mu Chen was completely stunned. He had to shuffle back and forth, yet he could not get wet. How was that possible? These waterfalls will not be maintained continuously. There will be a momentary gap. If you want to fulfill this condition, your speed must be able to keep up with the momentary gap of the water current. Mu Chen let out a bitter smile. This difficulty wasn't small. However, it was indeed an excellent method of training his movement. Moreover, the Spirit King finger is indeed fierce and sharp. However, with the extent of training you have had with your fingers, it is still impossible for you to train in the Spirit King finger. Therefore, your fingers must accept this training. I will let some wooden logs fall down from time to time from the waterfall. And what you have to do is to use your fingers to pierce through these wooden logs that would flash by instantly. Teacher Mo slowly spoke. Mu Chen felt his head becoming numb again. The wooden logs would fall down rapidly through the water current. Just how powerful would it be? Moreover, based on their speed, he would miss it if he was slightly distracted. If he wanted to pierce through it, he must take action the moment when the wooden logs passed by. This not only requires a perfect control of your attacking speed, it is also an extremely brutal training towards his fingers. What is it? Are you afraid? Teacher Mo said faintly. Although it is a bit troublesome, it's not enough to make me feel afraid. Mu Chen took a deep breath. His handsome face gradually became calm and eagerness emerged within his black eyes. Okay. Seeing this, Teacher Mo also nodded his head in satisfaction. Then, let's begin. Mu Chen also nodded. He did not plan on being indecisive and immediately moved. He directly passed by the surface of the water and charged directly into the fierce waterfall currents like a swallow. Then, he landed on top of a narrow wooden log. Boom! The powerful water current charged down fiercely. Mu Chen toes hurriedly touched the wooden log and charged to the next wooden log in front of him. Bang! But just when he was about to charge out, a powerful water current rushed down and instantly threw him into the lake below. He seemed to have underestimated the speed of the water current. Mu Chen spat out the lake's water in his mouth and his hands slapped the water. Then, his body jumped onto a wooden log again. His face had already become completely serious and spiritual energy gushed out of his body in order to defend against the water current's impact. In the beginning, it was apparent that he had to use all his spiritual energy to protect his body. Then, he would gradually get accustomed to it. Mu Chen focused all his senses before rushing out again and passed straight through a water current. Then, he landed on another wooden log. However, just when he was about to leap forward again, he heard a strange sound coming from the water current and his eyes stared up. He noticed a black shadow fiercely charging down from the water current. It was a wooden log mixed up in the water current. 2 fingers from Mu Chen's hand were straightened out and in the next instant, it fiercely thrust out. The 2 fingers were like spears as they stirred the layers of water vapor. Then, it directly stabbed ruthlessly as the black shadow passed by. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. The wooden logs only shuddered and showed no signs of being thrusted through. Then, it flowed down the water current into the lake below. Seeing that his strike was completely useless, Mu Chen grinned. An intense pain came from his fingertips. In addition to the speed of it flowing down, the wooden log was soaked with the lake's water. It was harder than fine iron. Moreover, he could not use spiritual energy. This sort of collision made it feel that the bones of his fingertips had shattered. Boom! Due to this slight distraction, the waterfall poured down rapidly and directly blew Mu Chen into the lake. Damn it! Mu Chen stuck his head out from within the lake and cursed fiercely. He endured the pain from his fingertips and stood on once again. He pushed his speed to the extreme and charged straight out. Bang! 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 Underneath the waterfall, a figure was constantly blown out and was mercilessly pushed into the lake. This powerful force was enough to make Mu Chen dizzy. However, he stubbornly endured the pain throughout his entire body and gritted his teeth. His speed was increasing endlessly. Although he would sometimes be able to dodge the water current's impact once, the wooden log flowing down the water current still tormented his fingers. Near the waterfall, Tang Qian'er and the others, who were sitting cross-legged, heard the commotion and quietly opened their eyes. Upon looking at the commotion, they immediately shivered. Although they have not personally experienced it, they could tell that Mu Chen was facing something more vicious than them just by looking at it. Beside the lake, Teacher Mo was standing with his hands held behind his back. He looked calmly at the awkward figure beneath waterfall. If he wants to succeed, he must first pay a price. Throughout the entire afternoon, the figure would tirelessly shuffle back and forth the waterfall. During this period, even Tang Qian'er and the others took 2 breaks. However, Mu Chen did not have the slightest plans of stopping this demonic training. When the sunset emerged in the sky, Tang Qian'er and the others would drag their exhausted bodies onto the shore. Every single one of them were tired and had a pale expression. They did not care and slumped down onto the ground while panting heavily. Seeing this, Teacher Mo said, "Let's end today's training." Tang Qian'er and the others had just become relieved, yet they immediately turned gloomy the moment the next phrase came out. "We'll continue it tomorrow." Tang Qian'er and the others slumped down on the ground powerlessly and rested for a while. However, they could still hear a plopping sound coming from nearby. Then, they lifted their heads and noticed a slim figure moving like a machine. It seems that he did not hear Teacher Mo's words and continued to climb up and get washed away. Although they could feel that the figure was already somewhat sluggish due to the exhaustion, a determined will supported his thin body so that he did not fall down. "Teacher Mo, he's reaching his limit soon." Tang Qian'er bit her lips and could not help but look away towards Teacher Mo. Mo Fei shook his head slowly and said gently, "This is his own decision. He is stronger than you not just because of his talent. Mu Feng really has a good son." Chen Fan and the others had a complicated expression as they watched the tired figure beneath the waterfall. A rare sense of admiration emerged within their hearts. If Mu Chen's talent was higher than theirs, they could say that it was because the heavens have given it to him. However, they must admit that Mu Chen's willpower. This person that is really insane. Chapter 78 Shape, Condensation. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 78, Shape, Condensation. Time was like sand in an hourglass, and in the blink of an eye, half a month passed. During this half a month, Mu Chen had engaged in a high-intensity training underneath the waterfall every day. He did not know how many times he was fiercely smashed down by the impact of the waterfall into the lake. The logs that fell down from the waterfall made Mu Chen's fingers become swollen many times. If it wasn't because his spiritual energy would endlessly circulate and nurture his body and bones within his finger, Mu Chen would not have been able to endure it. In the first 5 days of this half a month, Mu Chen was almost always brought back by Teacher Mo in a half-unconscious state. The boy's gentleness would make others feel quite comfortable. However, once he decided to do something, the persistence that he showed even moved Teacher Mo. Luckily, Mu Chen began to display his talents out after 1 week of adaptation period. Although he would still be injured, it was already much better compared to the half-unconscious state he was in during the first week. Moreover, Mu Chen was adapting to it even more as the days passed. Sometimes, he would be able to follow the momentary gap of the waterfall's current. After many injuries and coupled with them being nurtured by spiritual energy, his fingers had finally been trained to the point where its lethal power had increased. He would occasionally pierce through the wooden logs that passed by if he managed to grasp onto the opportunity. The harsh training had finally begun to show its results. Naturally, Mu Chen wasn't the only one who improved during this period of time. Tang Qian'er and the others had also improved after training under the pressure below the waterfall. Amongst them, the ones who improved the most were Chen Fan and Hui Yun. After all, the two of them had long attempted to condense their spiritual wheel. Right now, they only need to cross through a small step in order to officially advance to the spiritual rotation stage. Thus, they were surprised to discover that the spiritual energy within their aura sea had completely condensed into a spiritual wheel on the 13th day of the training. The spiritual energy that surged out had split apart the massive water current flowing down. However, Teacher Mo made them continue their training underneath the waterfall after they had successfully advanced to the spiritual rotation stage. It was to allow them to stabilize their level as soon as possible and to avoid their spiritual energy to show signs of being unsubstantial. Furthermore, Tang Qian'er and Mo Ling were also stimulated when they were aware that Chen Fan and Hui Yun had succeeded in their advancement to the spiritual rotation stage. The amount of time they rested daily had been greatly reduced and they gritted their teeth to bear the impact of the water current. They circulated the spiritual energy within their bodies and hoped that they would soon reach the spiritual rotation stage. Under the scorching sun in the horizon, the 5 figures were facing waves of pressure underneath the freezing waterfall and allowed time to slowly pass by. Bang! The waterfall descended down from the mountain stream and landed in the lake below. Water vapor splashed and filled the sky. At the edge of the lake, Teacher Mo held his hands behind his back as he looked at Tang Qian'er and the others sitting cross-legged below the waterfall. He felt the increasingly dense spiritual energy fluctuation and nodded his head slightly. Then, he turned his head over to another direction. It was evident that the waterfall over there was much more rapid. The massive water current would rumble as it flowed down. Sounds of rumbling reverberated itself among the mountain. Underneath the waterfall were numerous wooden logs. Mu Chen's body was swiftly jumping across the wooden logs like a nimble monkey. His speed was extraordinary and sometimes, you could only see a shadow flashing by. It's not enough. However, Mu Chen was not satisfied with his own speed. Instead, he frowned. The cold water vapor splashed onto his face and allowed his state of mind to calm down. The dark black spiritual energy surged out of Mu Chen's body and wrapped around his feet. In that instant, a booming sound resounded and he seemed to vanish into thin air. The water current that covered the sky suddenly descended down. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed when he saw this and his body instantly moved. He was like lightning and shuffled through the water current within the waterfall. At this moment, he had pushed his speed to the very limits. Swoosh! A vague shadow emerged on a wooden log and the impact from the water current directly passed through it. It was actually an afterimage caused by his high speed. Ha! Teacher Mo's eyes suddenly focused as he watched this scene from the lake. His mouth issued out a light, sound. At this moment, Mu Chen seemed to have been separated from the outside world. He could feel that his body suddenly became a lot lighter while the water current which was originally impossible to catch with his eyes had suddenly slowed down. He could even see the tiny gap between the curtains of water. As long as he passed through those gaps, the waterfall would not be able to touch him. Swish! Mu Chen's figure rushed out like a blur and dark black spiritual energy continued to be instigated around his legs. A blurry figure emerged and its body seemed to pass through the gap inside the waterfall like a black line. Swoosh! Moreover, a black shadow seemed to have flowed down the rushing water as Mu Chen's body passed through the gap in the water current. However, Mu Chen's eyes remained calm. He paused for a moment while sticking up 2 fingers. Then, his arm extended straight out and his fingers seemed to be like a spear. It pierced through the flow of water and accurately struck the center of the wooden log while it flowed down from the waterfall. Bang! A deep sound resounded out. Mu Chen's fingers forcefully pierced through the wooden log and caused splinters of wood to fly out. Then, it was washed away by the water current. Joy instantly surged out of Mu Chen's heart. It was the most relaxing attack he had done during these 20 or so days. There wasn't the slightest hesitation and his power flowed out perfectly. Ha! An indescribable delight rang out within Mu Chen's heart. Then, he could not help but laugh out loud. His body moved and turned into a black line as he shuffled through the waterfall. Bang! 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 While shuffling through the waterfall, his attacks did not stop. The winds emitted from his fingers were like lightning and grasped the timing to attack perfectly. Numerous wooden logs were pierced through as they passed near his body. At this moment, these sounds seemed to have formed a wonderful rhythmic melody beneath another waterfall. Tang Qian'er and the others were shocked by this rhythmic sound and turned their gazes over. Then, they were stunned when they noticed the shadow shuffling back and forth like a ghost beneath the waterfall. This crazy guy. Chen Fan could not help but open his mouth wide. After he had advanced to the spiritual rotation stage, he wasn't willing to accept Mu Chen and attempted Mu Chen's training. However, he was instantly washed away by a wooden log. Later on, he used his spiritual energy to wrap it around his body and attempted it once again. But in the end, he was still fiercely blown away by a wooden log flowing down the waterfall. And right now, Mu Chen was actually treating those wooden logs within the waterfall like they were something ordinary. Moreover, he did not forget to pierce through all the wooden logs with his fingers as they passed by. Just what sort of terrifying speed and finger strength would it require to do this? Within the entire Northern Spiritual Academy, the West Branch's Lu Mubai might be the only one who could fight against this crazy individual. As Tang Qian'er and the others watched Mu Chen as if he was a monster, Mu Chen finally stopped and stood steadily on a wooden log after 10 minutes. He balanced himself, but did not plan on backing out yet. Instead, he sat down cross-legged as Tang Qian'er and the others gazed at him, puzzled. Dark black spiritual energy surged out from within his body and blocked the impact from the waterfall. Seeing Mu Chen's strange action, Tang Qian'er and the others were slightly startled. Then, they could feel a special spiritual energy fluctuation emitting out from within Mu Chen's body. This is... Teacher Mo's eyebrows lifted up slightly. He made a breakthrough in his Gong Fa spiritual art. Teacher Mo's prediction was correct. Previously, Mu Chen could feel an indescribable relaxing feeling within his body and pushed his speed to the very limits. However, when he did that, he discovered that the spiritual energy within his body suddenly circulated and the route it took was the circulation route for the Great Pagoda art. The dark black spiritual energy surged out and finally entered his aura sea. In that instant, Mu Chen's mind had followed and entered it as well. Then, he was surprised to see the dark black spiritual energy rising up on top of the spiritual wheel in his aura sea. It slowly condensed and formed a palm-sized illusionary light tower. The light tower was extremely unreal and seemed like it would vanish if some wind blew. If you looked at it carefully, the tower seemed to have 9 floors. However, aside from the foundation of the tower which seemed to look real, the rest of it was like an illusion. But when this illusionary light tower was formed, Mu Chen could feel the mysterious lights within his body lighting up once again. These lights were spread around the depths of his body. However, when he looked, he discovered that when he connected the lights together, they would form a massive light tower within Mu Chen's body. The moment that this light tower appeared, the dark black spiritual energy on the surface of Mu Chen's body in the outside world seemed to have formed a vague black light tower. This tower of light protected his entire body. Rumble. The boundless waterfall descended down and smashed onto the black light tower, yet the light tower was motionless. However, the black light tower only lasted for an instant before swiftly fading away. Furthermore, Mu Chen's tightly closed eyes slowly opened when the light tower faded away. A hint of delight could not be concealed within the depths of his eyes. At this moment, the great pagoda art which he trained in had suddenly entered the shape, condensation level. Chapter 79 Results. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 79, Results. Within the flowing waterfall, Mu Chen opened his eyes. His face was completely filled with delight. He never expected that the great pagoda art would actually make a breakthrough at this moment. This had gone beyond his expectations. The great pagoda art had a total of 3 levels: foundation, shape, condensation and tower form. The first level was relatively easy to reach. However, Mu Chen did not make much progress after that. Although he felt that he was becoming increasingly proficient in the great pagoda art, the feeling of breakthrough did not appear until today. Within his aura sea, the illusionary light tower above his spiritual energy light wheel had already vanished. However, Mu Chen could clearly feel that the spiritual energy flowing within his body had become increasingly pure as it condensed. Moreover, he could vaguely feel the sealed spiritual pulse within his body after the great pagoda art had reached the shape, condensation level. It was not like before when he could not perceive it at all. It was evident that the spiritual pulse that his mother had sealed was gradually being perceived by him as he was deepening his understanding about the great pagoda art. Mu Chen lowered his head and looked at his hand. He gently clenched it and an inexplicit expression emerged on his face. It was the first time that he could clearly feel the hidden spiritual pulse within his body. He could not predict what level the spiritual pulse was, but he could vaguely feel a peculiar feeling. It was as if it was awakening from hibernating and begun to reveal itself from within the clouds. He was looking forward to the moment when his great pagoda art reaches the mastery stage. 1. Any martial arts, in the case of TGR, spiritual arts, usually can be split into different levels of mastery. In this case, the mastery stage usually means when it is either completely mastered or close to being completely mastered, would depend on the story to determine which one. Just how powerful would the spiritual pulse be when that happens? Mu Chen took a deep breath and spread out his hands, allowing the spiritual energy which was wrapped around his body to disappear. He allowed the freezing waterfall to bombard his body before himself pushing off with his toes. His body turned into a black shadow and rushed out. In the end, he landed beside the lake. At this moment, Tang Qianer and the others had already stopped training and were resting on the shore. They had a strange expression when they noticed Mu Chen rushing over to their side. They had completely witnessed the commotion caused by Mu Chen earlier. You seem to have become even more powerful. Chen Fan looked at Mu Chen. The latter's aura remained at the spiritual rotation stage initial movement. However, they felt that he was completely different from before. Even if he was considered to be at the same cultivation level, he felt some danger when he faced Mu Chen. Mu Chen smiled. Currently, he had truly succeeded in his training for the Shadow Spirit Step and Spirit King Finger. Although he still required actual combat to hone it, his combat ability had already improved greatly. Moreover, his great pagoda art had made a breakthrough earlier and his spiritual energy was much more powerful compared to Chen Fan and the others. It was to the point where he was not inferior to a spiritual rotation stage late phase in terms of density and endurance of spiritual energy. It seems that this training style has already reached your desired effects. Teacher Mo slowly walked over and glanced at Mu Chen as he smiled. Mu Chen nodded. Right now, he could truly follow the speed of the waterfall's current. Furthermore, he could even pierce through the wooden logs which flowed down without missing a single one. Therefore, he had already succeeded in reaching the results he had initially desired. However, training is still just training. Right now, you need actual combat to hone the spiritual arts that you've trained. Teacher Mo smiled and turned to Chen Fan and Hui Yun. The two of you should join forces and see if you can defeat him. Join forces. Chen Fan and Hui Yun frowned. However, they stared eagerly at Mu Chen. During this period of time, Mu Chen had severely shocked them. If they were able to beat Mu Chen up, then they would be able to balance their emotions. They understood that they would not be Mu Chen's opponent if they were fighting individually. However, if they joined forces, they still had some confidence about winning. After all, they were both at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase like Mu Chen. It was possible to make up for the gap by relying on numbers. Mu Chen, will you let us feel happy? Chen Fan grinned as he spoke. You're actually still acting this happy when it's 2 against 1, can't you be more promising? Tang Qian'er batted her eye at Chen Fan and sighed. On the other hand, Mu Chen smiled. He glanced at Teacher Mo before nodding his head and said. Since it's like this, I'll have to trouble the two of you to help me hone my skills for a while. Seeing Mu Chen accept, Chen Fan and Huiyun suddenly laughed. They twisted their neck and said. That's great. However, I will tell you in advance, you shouldn't treat us like students, who have never fought against humans before. We have once participated in an adventurers team, so we fought against others in a bloody battle before. Thank you for the reminder. Mu Chen slowly extended his hands and said. Please guide me. Chen Fan and Huiyun's faces became slightly serious when they saw this. Although they were saying this, they were still quite afraid of Mu Chen. After all, Mu Chen had trained under their gazes during the past 20 days. They knew somewhat how powerful the latter was. Let's go. The two of them were quite familiar with each other. They exchanged gazes and rushed out towards Mu Chen at the same time without deliberately reminding the other one. Moreover, they split apart to the sides as they rushed over. Dense spiritual energy surged out from Chen Fan and Huiyun's body. Their speed instantly increased and their tightly clenched fists emerged on the left and right side of Mu Chen. A vicious wind came from their fists and headed towards Mu Chen's head ruthlessly. When she saw the two of them being so merciless against Mu Chen, Tang Qian'er could not help but call out softly. However, Mu Chen remained quite calm against this synchronized attack. Before the winds from their fist could reach him, he had already taken half a step back. The fierce winds brushed past his face and lifted up Mu Chen's hair. It revealed a pair of black eyes that were calm like a serene lake. Tempest Massacre Fist. Since Mu Chen had easily avoided their offense, Chen Fan and Huiyun pressed onwards tightly. Their fists blasted out and a tempest seemed to have emerged. A fierce fist wind was enveloped by dense spiritual energy and directly charged over at Mu Chen. As this storm-like attack rushed over, spiritual energy gushed out from Mu Chen's feet. His body moved and with a swishing sound, he seemed to have become a ghostly shadow and directly passed through the duo's continuous offensive. The duo's fist winds did not manage to touch Mu Chen's body at all. What speed! Chen Fan and Huiyun narrowed their eyes. They did not manage to capture how Mu Chen passed through their offensive. On the left. Light flashed through the corner of their eyes and they turned around to fire off a kick. The kick was like a spear and tore apart the air as it fiercely bombarded the figure over there. However, when their kicks reached the figure, it went straight through. There wasn't the slightest feeling of them hitting Mu Chen. It's an afterimage. A touch of amazement finally flashed through Chen Fan and Huiyun's eyes. How could Mu Chen's speed be this swift and bizarre? Over here. Laughter suddenly rang out from their right side. Chen Fan and Huiyun were surprised and hurriedly turned their body. However, they witnessed Mu Chen with a total of 4 fingers standing up on both hands. A vague golden light was flashing on the fingertips while an extremely fierce fluctuation emitted out. Swish! Mu Chen's arm trembled. The fingers seemed to pierce through the air like lightning as it charged straight towards Chen Fan and Huiyun's throat. Boom! A dense spiritual energy rushed out unreservedly from Chen Fan and Huiyun. It formed a thick spiritual energy light shield in front of them. It was apparent that they had noticed how powerful Mu Chen's attack was. But in face of their defense, Mu Chen did not show any signs of stopping. At his fingertips, a golden light seemed to surge out from his bones. It was filled with an extremely fierce fluctuation. Dong! Mu Chen's fingers finally landed on Chen Fan and Huayun's spiritual energy light shield. They watched as the light shield became distorted. Then afterwards, the fingers pierced through the spiritual energy light shield under the duo's widened eyes. Swish! Mu Chen's glowing fingertips stopped half an inch in front of Chen Fan and Huayun's throat. Although it did not touch their bodies, a bloodstain still appeared on their throats. A slight pain exuded out. Chen Fan and Huayun did not dare to move at all. They stared at the golden fingertips in front of them and took a deep gulp. If they were in a fight for life and death, Mu Chen's fingers would have ripped through their throats. Thanks for the fight. Mu Chen directed a smile at the duo. However, he felt some joy within his heart. The Shadow Spirit Step and the Spirit King Finger's power had exceeded his expectations. If he had to fight against two spiritual rotation stage opponents earlier, it would not be this easy even if he won. It seems that we should not even think about getting that seeded entry. Chen Fan helplessly pouted. Although they held back a little, it was evident that Mu Chen did not use his full strength as well. You wanted to take advantage of Mu Chen, yet in the end you were the ones that were taught a lesson, right? Tang Qianer suddenly smiled when she was aware of Mu Chen's victory. Qianer. We're at least considered your most faithful suitors. You shouldn't give us such a heavy blow, right? Chen Fan and Huayun said while being depressed. Thanks, but I would be happier if you two stopped pursuing after me. Tang Qianer smiled sweetly and had a pure and beautiful smile. However, she still gave the duo a relentless hit. Not bad. On the side, Teacher Mo also nodded as he smiled. However, your Shadow Spirit Step is still a bit rusty. You're unable to use it naturally and at ease. It seems that you will have to practice it for a while before it will integrate completely into your fights. Since it's impossible for them to give you a decent spar, I'll personally fight against you for the remainder of the time. Teacher Mo smiled as he stared at Mu Chen, who was completely stunned. Of course, I will suppress my strength to the level of spiritual rotation stage. No matter what methods you use, you will have perfectly completed the 1-month training if you are able to defeat me. How's that? Mu Chen grinned and nodded heavily. Not even the slightest hint of fear emerged in his eyes, instead, fighting spirit burned within his eyes. It was more than he could wish for to have a spirit stage powerhouse help him with his training. And while Mu Chen began to fight against Teacher Mo, suddenly a powerful spiritual energy exploded out in the forbidden lands behind the mountains within Lu Territory's Lu estate. The spiritual energy formed a fierce wind and caused the forest to shake. After a while, the forest gradually stopped shaking. A slender figure slowly walked out from a cave in the Forbidden Lands. That appearance, it was Lu Mubai. At this moment, he grasped his hands tightly and gently felt the powerful strength within his body. The smile on his face gradually became more savage. Mu Chen, I'm afraid that your lucky days are about to end. Chapter 80 Spirit Stage as a Sparring Partner. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 80 Spirit Stage as a Sparring Partner. After Mu Chen had defeated Chen Fan and Huayun, his opponent had suddenly become Teacher Mo. This change of events finally made Mu Chen suffer. Although Teacher Mo suppressed his strength to the spiritual rotation stage, it was not the initial phase and rather the spiritual rotation stage middle phase. Based on what Teacher Mo had said, you require great pressure if you want to temper yourself. If they were equally matched, the effects weren't as great. Initially, Mu Chen had no objections to these words. However, he felt that he was tricked by Teacher Mo after they began to fight. Although Teacher Mo suppressed his strength to the spiritual rotation stage middle phase, his keen vision, experience, the dexterity of his forged body and his variety of offensive and defensive techniques were all at the spirit stage level. He could suppress his spiritual energy, but he could not suppress these things. Therefore, Mu Chen was basically fighting against an opponent, who possesses spiritual rotation stage middle phase strength and has the experience of a spirit stage. The result of the battle was obvious. Mu Chen was completely slaughtered. During the first day of combat, Mu Chen had fought against Teacher Mo 13 times. He basically did not manage to do any significant damage to the latter and lost terribly every single time. On the side, Tang Qian'er and the others felt that it was an extremely painful sight to watch and turned their gazes away. The situation on the second day was slightly better. However, Mu Chen still remained in a disadvantaged position. If he was slightly careless, Teacher Mo would instantly take advantage of the flaw and defeat him in one move. Although Mu Chen's situation was quite miserable, he wasn't considered to be the same as any ordinary boy. In the spiritual road, he had experienced many bloody fights and had a certain excellent talent. He was able to quickly absorb the reason of his failure and improve by making changes bit by bit. Therefore, after being completely slaughtered by Teacher Mo for 2 days, he was finally able to gradually catch up to the pace. Although he was still in a disadvantaged position, he was, at the very least, able to counterattack. The counterattacks weren't that effective, but it was still considered to be an extremely decent change. Within the mountains, under the waterfall, dense spiritual energy erupted out and caused the gravel on the ground nearby to shatter to powder. A thin boy's figure flew out like the wind and like a blurry shadow, he instantly appeared in front of a slender figure. His hand was clenched tightly as spiritual energy surged out. It brought out vicious winds as it ruthlessly headed at the back of the slender figure's head. Bang! But before the fist managed to smash on its target, the slender figure seemed to have eyes behind his back and did not show signs of turning his body. A fist passed by his ears and bombarded behind him. It directly collided with the fist. A fierce breeze emitted out and the slender figure's body trembled slightly. His fist instantly turned into a palm as a dense spiritual energy surged out from the center of it. Dong! The thin figure was suddenly hit by a heavy blow and his body flew backwards. Then, the figure made a spin in mid-air before staggering as he landed on the ground. He lost again. Not too far away, Chen Fan and the others watched this scene and instantly grinned. During this past week, they have seen this scene numerous times. However, Mu Chen was currently doing a lot better than the previous week. At that time, Mu Chen would have been defeated miserably when Teacher Mo attacked. But as of now, he had already managed to initiate an attack, though those attacks were easily blocked by Teacher Mo. Mu Chen is already quite amazing like this. If it was us, we probably wouldn't even have the courage to fight against Teacher Mo. Tang Qian'er frowned and said when she noticed Chen Fan and the others snickering. It's true that we wouldn't dare to fight against Teacher Mo. But that's because we aren't that stupid. Chen Fan laughed. Unless he was stupid, why would he fight against a spirit stage? Even if the spirit stage powerhouse was to suppress his spiritual energy to the level of spiritual rotation stage, isn't it still the same thing? Tang Qian'er batted an eye at him sourly. Today is the final day of training. We will be fighting for the entries tomorrow. Mo Ling was a little regretful as he said. It seems that Brother Mu won't be able to reach his target. That's good. That guy is quite proud and arrogant. Even I would have to admire his performance during this period of time. However, how is it possible for him to defeat Teacher Mo? Hui Yun patted Mo Ling's shoulders and spoke. Mo Ling scratched his head. It was true. Teacher Mo was pretty much an unattainable existence in their eyes. With their current strength, it was basically impossible for them to defeat Teacher Mo. It was impossible even if he had suppressed his strength. That guy still refused to give up. Chen Fan suddenly said. He watched as Mu Chen, who was blown away by Teacher Mo, straightened himself. Within Mu Chen's eyes, there was still a fiery fighting spirit that refused to be extinguished. That guy. Chen Fan smacked his lips and immediately gave a wry smile as he scratched his head. He is quite crazy. However, he is definitely much stronger than us. At the very least, I would not be able to persist when I clearly knew I was going to be slaughtered. Tang Qian'er held her hands tightly. Although her eyes were filled with worry, she knew Mu Chen's personality quite well. The latter would never give up this easily. Let's do this one final time. You have to fight for the entries tomorrow, so you should have a good rest tonight. Seeing Mu Chen look over here once again, Teacher Mo nodded his head and spoke faintly. Mu Chen did not say anything. He only took a deep breath and his eyes instantly became sharp. Dark black spiritual energy surged out from his feet and his body turned into a black line as he headed directly at Teacher Mo. Teacher Mo did not move his body at all and only stomped with his feet. Some gravel on the ground flew up into the sky as he waved his sleeves. His spiritual energy surrounded the gravel and it covered the sky as it shot off towards Mu Chen like a volley of arrows. Swoosh! Mu Chen's speed suddenly accelerated and an afterimage emerged behind him. His body actually passed through the sky filled with gravel. Boom! Teacher Mo's body also rushed out at this moment. He instantly collided against Mu Chen. His spiritual energy surrounded his body, fist, fingers, elbow and legs. Every single part instantly turned into a lethal and terrifying weapon as it shot off fiercely at the vital areas of Mu Chen. Swish! Mu Chen pushed the shadow spirit step to the limits and a blurry shadow went around Teacher Mo. He avoided every single attack that contained a powerful force. It's still not fast enough. Mu Chen could feel Teacher Mo's attacks barely hitting him. The powerful winds caused by the attacks made his skin sting. Moreover, it was obvious that the latter's offensive was speeding up. Sooner or later, he would be showered by it. He must let his speed become even faster. Mu Chen gritted his teeth. At this moment, he gathered all his focus and pushed his spiritual energy to the extreme. The spiritual energy within his meridians roared and brought dense waves of energy. It was still not fast enough. His attacks weren't strong enough. An unyielding roar echoed within Mu Chen's heart. His eyes seemed to have been cut apart from the world again. He did not make any strange sound and only watched Teacher Mo's fierce offensive in front of him. Bring out all my power. Buzz. As this roar echoed within Mu Chen's heart, a buzzing sound suddenly rang out from within Mu Chen's aura sea. He could see that his spiritual energy had actually gathered together and formed a vague light tower above the spiritual wheel in his aura sea. Buzz. The moment that the vague light tower emerged, light seemed to have been summoned and lit up within the depths of Mu Chen's body. Boom. The spiritual energy within Mu Chen's body suddenly rose sharply and flooded out. An indescribable feeling rumbled through his limbs and bones. Swish. At this very moment, Mu Chen's speed suddenly increased. It even turned into numerous afterimages and enshrouded Teacher Mo. Afterwards, the latter was somewhat surprised to discover that all his attacks were dodged by Mu Chen. How could his speed suddenly increase this much? A hint of suspicion arose within Teacher Mo's heart. Mu Chen's speed became faster. How is that possible? Chen Fan and the others, who were watching this scene, also exclaimed out loud. They were unable to tell which afterimage was Mu Chen's true body. Teacher Mo stopped his attacks. He stared at the afterimages that surrounded his body as the winds surged out and enveloped him. He frowned for a moment. Mu Chen, who had been firmly locked on by him, had suddenly escaped his sights. It's my turn to attack. A cry suddenly resounded through the sky. Teacher Mo narrowed his eyes and suddenly turned around. He noticed that Mu Chen had two fingers that were straightened out and a dazzling golden light was flashing at the fingertips. This light actually emitted out from the bones and it made it seem that the fingers were made of gold. Swish. The golden fingers were like a divine golden spear as it tore through the sky. An extremely fierce power, along with an abnormally dense spiritual energy, stabbed at Teacher Mo's chest at lightning speed. There was no hesitation within that stab. It was sharp and vicious. So fast. Teacher Mo was also surprised. The dazzling golden light had almost obscured his vision. Before he could respond, the golden fingers had already been thrusted over. Boom! A dense and matchless spiritual energy instantly rushed out from Teacher Mo's body. At the same time, cracks appeared on the ground and a huge boulder nearby even instantly shattered. Mu Chen's finger also landed on Teacher Mo's body at this moment. However, before it could penetrate through, it was bounced back by the powerful spiritual energy. His body left a dozen or so meters trail on the ground before it finally stopped. Tang Qian'er and the others were flabbergasted as they witnessed this scene. Then, Tang Qian'er could not help but suddenly shout out. Teacher Mo, you cheated. In the moment earlier, the spiritual energy that erupted out from Teacher Mo's body had far surpassed the limits of a spiritual rotation stage. Hearing Tang Qian'er's shout, Teacher Mo could not help but feel slightly embarrassed. It was true that he had brought out his spirit stage's spiritual energy. However, it was not intentional. Rather, it was a reflex due to his body sensing danger. Mu Chen climbed up awkwardly from the ground and stared at his body covered with mud. However, he did not reveal any signs of being dispirited. Instead, the eyes that looked over at Teacher Mo were filled with excitement. This boy. Teacher Mo could not help but shake his head when he stared at Mu Chen's excited expression. He immediately chuckled and raised his thumb towards Mu Chen. Amazing, I won. Mu Chen sat down on the ground and felt exhausted, yet he could not endure laughing out loud. Holy sh*t. No way, right? Chen Fan, Hui Yun and Mo Ling were all staring dumbfounded at Mu Chen, who was laughing maniacally. Is this crazy bastard still human?